everyone, it's Kirsten here from Soulmate Shoes, and today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what it's actually like working in a shoe store. So I started working at Saucony and Sperry when I was a sophomore in high school, and I worked there for a couple years. And so for me, I started off with just an interview, like most jobs. But my brother had actually already worked at the shoe store, so the interview was pretty relaxed because I knew the manager, and he just asked me questions about what I would do if something certain things happened, kind of like any interview would go. But then when I started training, it was a little bit different than most jobs because you're not just learning how to run the register and where everything is. You also have to know the product really well. So since I worked at a shoe store, because I was mostly on the Saucony side of things, I had to learn how the shoes were built, the stability, or if they were stability shoes, neutral shoes, the difference between each pair, which shoes were better for people who pronate versus anyone who doesn't pronate. So there was just kind of a lot going on with that. And so that took me a while. They gave me a book when I started though. So it had each pair of shoes, it had the build, how much cushion each pair had, and that was all leveled out. So I just spent a couple weeks kind of flipping through that book, learning each style of shoes, so when customers asked questions, I was ready to answer them. But since I was a runner, I already knew a lot about shoes. It was just learning Saucony specific answers. So that took quite a bit of time and was something I hadn't really thought about going into working at a shoe store. But then, since I was working at a store that was both Saucony and Sperry, I kind of had to know a little bit about both sides, even though I was specifically working on the Saucony side of things. So I had to learn a little bit about the Sperry shoes, but just enough to answer questions. And there's always other people at the store. If I didn't know the answers to those questions, I could just kind of direct them to someone who could. Another big thing was learning where everything was in the store. So obviously all your shoes are out and there's shelves and there's different sizes, but we also have more in the back. And our back room was just rows of shelves. And the Saucony ones were a little easier to find because there isn't as many different types of those kinds of shoes. But when you got to the Sperry section, there were so many different types of Sperry, so many different colors, and it could take a good 10 minutes to find shoes in the back. So just kind of memorizing where everything was at in the back was a huge part of kind of figuring out what I was doing and part of my training as well. The register was pretty easy for me just because I'd worked at places that had a register before, and they're all pretty similar. I mean, there's slight differences. We had to log in, so just memorizing my login so I could get that done quickly was a big thing. Another thing I had to learn how to do was transferring things from full price to the clearance prices, and how to reprice them, and making sure they were organized correctly. So that took me a little bit of time because we used a dot system for pricing. So I had to make sure there was correct dots were on all the boxes, and that was something I checked pretty much every shift. So that was kind of my training, was just learning how to do all of that stuff. But then once I really started working and my training was over, my day-to-day tasks, the main thing that I was in charge of, responsible for doing, was just helping customers and asking them questions and figuring out what they were looking for and helping them find that. Which on the Saucony side of things, it was figuring out if they were going to use them for running. And then we had regular training shoes, we had road racing shoes, and we had trail running shoes. So it was figuring out what they were looking for, if they needed support or not, helping them find the right size, because some people have issues with shoes because they're not in the correct size of shoe. So just asking questions and knowing what questions to ask was huge for helping the customers. And for me, a lot of my customers were already runners who knew what they wanted, but they were maybe wanting to switch something up, or they needed something for a specific race. And that's where like our spikes and road racing shoes kind of came into play, and along with our trail shoes, because the trail shoes are heavier but they give more ankle support. So like if somebody needed something for a trail run, those were what we would direct them towards. So that was like the main thing that I did at work, but we weren't always super busy, so like keeping the store clean is super important, so when people come in they're not like turned off by the store. And we had hard floors, like hard concrete flooring, and so in the winter, especially when like salt and snow and rain, like that stuff got tracked in, we had to sweep and make sure the floor was dry so nobody slipped, and we had to do that often throughout our shift depending on how busy we were, just because the ground would get so dirty. So like 2 or 3 times throughout my shift I would sweep and like mop up the floor if it was wet. But then also just like people pulling boxes, because the way our boxes were set up, they were stacked on top of each other and they were all like tight. So if one box got pulled, usually a few got pulled out, so I'd have to line up, make sure all the boxes were lined up and in the correct spot, and like move them and resize if they weren't in the correct size order. I'd have to go back and resize them. So just like making sure the store looked presentable was a big part of my job working at Saucony as well. And then anytime I saw like a hole in the shelves, I would go find like a shoe size that needed to be replaced and just keep the store completely stocked so that there was never any gaps, especially in the sizes, because if someone didn't have their size out there, then we would have to go back while they were waiting and find their size. So it was just important to keep everything stocked. And that could be difficult because, like I said before, finding shoes in the back room could be super difficult just because things it was just big racks that they moved to, the ones in the middle rolled. So like when you rolled them, sometimes boxes would fall and they wouldn't be in the right spot. So it'd take a few minutes just to find the boxes and get everything restocked correctly. And then another task that I was had to do while I was working there was answering the phone. And most of the time, the phone calls came from other stores. So the way, since Saucony and Sperry is like a pretty big brand, there's several outlet stores, and we could call any of them and ask for shoes if like a customer was looking for a specific shoe, and have them ship the shoe directly to the customer. And that was super nice, except when we were busy and they would call and want us to go looking for a shoe because it took some time. And especially when they were looking for a specific Sperry shoe, because the names are all so similar, and it took me forever to learn the difference and find where they were at. So when I would be asked to find a specific Sperry shoe at a specific size, and you can check the computer and it will tell you if we have that shoe. So that's why they would call us. So then we'd have to go track it down, and that didn't always it wasn't always out on the floor, so we'd have to go to the back then. And it just was a very long process whenever we got phone calls from other stores. And then another thing was just checking out customers. So whenever they were ready, we would ring them out, make sure the pricing was all right, they got any sales deals that was listed, which was pretty simple and just kind of similar to working at any retail type store. So any given day, I would work with between 2 other people, 4 or 5 other people, depending on how busy we were, which was pretty nice when we had a few extra. But when there was only 2 of us, it was kind of hard because one of them was usually a manager and they had paperwork or closing type tasks they had to deal with, especially money stuff. And so they weren't always able to be out on the floor with me, so then I'm running both stores. And the way ours was set up was Saucony was on the right side and Sperry was on the left. And then there was a big wall down the middle, except in the very back there was an opening that you could cross over, and in the front where the registers were was open, so you could see both sides there. But unless I stood directly in the middle, I couldn't see both sides of the store, which was kind of difficult. But that only happened like during the week, and we usually weren't very busy on weeknights just because it was an outlet store and not very many people need to buy running shoes or Sperry's every day, so we weren't usually super busy. One of the biggest things I liked about working there, though, was who I worked with. The manager I started with was super great, and then I worked with several friends from school. A few of them I ran cross country with, and we were all just really close, so it was easy to, like, I never disliked going to work because I loved everyone that I worked with. And like I mentioned before, our store was never super busy, except like on busy weekends where like the mall had a lot of sales going on, or like when Saucony and Sperry specifically had sales going on was when we were the busiest. Some of the things that I enjoyed the most about working at a shoe store was just like talking to the customers and like kind of getting to hear their stories. A lot of them were runners like me, so we would talk about different races that we'd run and just different things that we liked about it, different shoes they had run in, so we would kind of compare what shoes we ran in as well. I got to meet a lot of high school runners that from different schools because I was currently, like at the time, I was running at my high school, and so we'd get to talk about different things and just like our different training programs, which was really interesting to me. And then I also liked that I got to work with my friends. Like I said before, we were one of the guys was on my cross country team, and so it was super nice to be able to work with him. And we worked together a lot because we had the same schedules with practice and stuff. And then the discounts and sales were amazing. My parents made me switch to Saucony's while I worked there because I got a free pair every couple months, and like I got a certain percent off of my shoes, which made them really affordable. And so that was really cool because I got to try out some different running shoes. And then there was also these like sale things that were just for employees that we'd get to do, and it would just be specific shoes in specific sizes and colors, so like you couldn't be super picky, but you'd get on and you could just like search for what you were looking for, and they'd be like $20 maybe. And one year I got all of my family's Christmas presents off of the sale site, and I got a pair of duck boots off of there super cheap, and just several other cool shoes that I was able to find because I was an employee for them. So those are like the main things that I liked about working at the store. But when it came down to the things I didn't like, I did not enjoy how slow we were. I'd go in for like a 6-hour shift and it would crawl by because you can only restock the shoes so many times, and you only have to straighten, like once you've done something, it was already done. It didn't need to be done again unless like customers came in and messed it up, which we weren't very busy during the week. So my shifts always felt super duper slow. And then another thing I didn't like, and this is just a shoe thing, is you're expected to like put the shoes on the customer. Like everyone knows how to put a shoe on, I assume. So like the fact that we had to like unlace them and help the customer put it on their foot, it was just super gross to me. I don't like feet. So the fact that I had to touch people's feet and help them put their shoes on was not fun. I really didn't enjoy it. It was awkward most of the time. Thankfully, most customers would be like, just, I can do it. I can put my shoes on. And I was like, thank you. I don't want to touch your feet. I don't want to put your shoe on for you. You can handle that. So no, I did not like that part of my job. Then about halfway through the time I worked there, we got a new manager. And my first shift with him, he had moved everything around, didn't introduce himself to me. I had no clue who he was when I got there to work. And it was just super awkward, and I didn't like him at all. And he ended up being the reason I left, but that's okay. I also didn't like the wall in the middle of the store. I couldn't see, so like when it came to theft prevention, like I couldn't watch both sides of the store at once when I was the only person out on the floor. And that just made things very difficult. And then, if I had to choose to work at a shoe store again, I wouldn't work at the Saucony and Sperry that I worked at again just because of how slow it was. But if I was in a bigger city, like a bigger mall, maybe I would consider working at a shoe store again just because I do like talking to people and like I like the environment that I was in. It was just too slow, and now that I'm working at a job that's fast paced, I don't think I would go back to working at a job that slow again. So I hope that helped you if you were just trying to decide if you would want to work at a shoe store. Thanks for watching.